Marcus Whitfield was 39 years old the morning he found the envelope tucked inside the hollow leg of the cedar writing desk he had built with his own hands. She had been gone for 11 days. Her car, her clothes, her silence, all of it gone before he came home from the overnight shift. Just a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that said she needed space and that she would be in touch. She was not in touch. But in the desk, sealed and dated 5 years ago in her own careful handwriting, there was something else. He held it in both hands for a long time without opening it. The envelope was addressed to no one. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't an apology. It was a plan, dated 5 years ago, which meant the woman who cooked dinner beside him on Sundays and called his mother Miss Carla and said she didn't believe in secrets. That woman had written this before they ever bought the house together, before they combined accounts, before she became the sole signatory on the LLC they registered under her name for tax efficiency. As her accountant had explained, $240,000 had moved through that LLC in the last 3 years. Marcus had never been on the books. She had no idea I had spent the last 2 years quietly ensuring that every cent of it could be traced back to its origin. She had no idea what Marcus Whitfield actually was. What happened next would cost Simone everything she thought she had already taken. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The day had started the way most of Marcus's days started. Early, quiet, and ordered. It was a civil engineer by trade, a man who built water treatment systems for mid-sized municipalities across the Carolinas and Virginia. He woke before 5, brewed a single cup of strong coffee, and sat at the kitchen table he had poured, and finished himself an 11-foot slab of walnut he had sourced from a mill outside of Asheboro, North Carolina. The surface was level to a millimeter. He had checked it twice before sealing it. It had owned the house in Charlotte's West End for 6 years. He had renovated it himself over 18 months before Simone ever moved in, reframing the basement, rerouting the plumbing, laying the radiant floor heat in the main bedroom, because she had once mentioned, offhandedly, that her feet were always cold in winter. He had remembered that. His grandfather, a man named Elmore, who had built bridges in rural Georgia with nothing but a transit level and a crew of 4, used to sit him down after Sunday meals and say, "Marcus, the foundation is the whole argument. Get it right and everything stands. Rush it and everything falls. Don't matter how pretty the house is." Marcus carried that. He carried it into his career, into his home, into the way he read people. Slowly, from the ground up, checking the load-bearing assumptions before he trusted the structure. The morning he found a letter. Simone had been gone for 11 days, but before that, she had been present in the way that good performers are present, fully inhabited, completely invested in the character she was playing. She kissed his cheek every morning. She asked about his projects. She kept her phone face down, and he did not ask about it, because he already knew why. The same way he knew why the second set of wireless earbuds in her car's cup holder was a brand he had never bought her. He had noticed, as an engineer notices, without reaction, without confrontation, just documentation. He had met Simone 8 years earlier at a continuing education seminar in Raleigh. She was there for her MBA coursework, sitting in the row ahead of him, taking handwritten notes in a legal pad with a precision that caught his attention. After the session, she had turned to ask about one of the panelists, and they talked for 2 hours at a coffee shop down the street. She was smart in a way that was organized rather than flashy. She laughed like she meant it. When he drove her back to her hotel, she shook his hand at the door, which he found unusual and, for that reason, interesting. For 3 years, they were good together. For 2 after that, they were fine. For the last 2, they had been, he understood now, in completely different stories. The signal had come 3 weeks before she left. A contractor Marcus used regularly, a man named Derek, who ran a small electrical outfit, had stopped by the house to drop off a receipt. Simone didn't know Derek well enough to perform for him. When she stepped inside to take a phone call, Derek glanced at Marcus and said quietly, Dad had seen her car on 4 separate Thursday evenings outside a residential address in Noda. He gave the address without being asked, a side he figured Marcus would want to know. Then he took his receipt and left. Marcus sat with his coffee for a long time after Derek's truck disappeared around the corner. He did not call Simone. He went to his workshop. The address Derek gave him was a three-bedroom craftsman on a tree-lined block that, according to the Mecklenburg County property records he pulled up on his laptop that evening, was owned by a man named Travis Ellison, 36 years old, employed loosely as a financial consultant. The LLC registration Marcus found in 15 minutes of searching showed Ellison's consulting firm had been formed 4 years ago and had had one primary client in that entire period. The LLC was the same one Simone managed, the one her accountant had suggested, the one registered in her name for tax efficiency. Marcus sat with that for a moment. Then he opened a fresh spreadsheet. He spent 3 evenings going back through their joint accounts and the LLC's documented filings, which Simone had shared access to via a cloud folder she had apparently forgotten he still had credentials for. He built a ledger, column by column, date by date. 11 months of consulting invoices from Travis Ellison's firm to Simone's LLC, ranging from $8,000 to $22,000 each. Services rendered listed as strategic advisory and market development. There were no deliverables, no reports, no strategy decks, no market analysis. There was $240,000 in total. A. cross-referenced the dates against his own calendar. Every payment period aligned with a stretch when Marcus had been traveling for work, a dam rehabilitation project in Statesville, a filtration plant overhaul in Danville, an emergency structural consult in Richmond. She had known his schedule better than anyone. His hands didn't shake. He photographed the spreadsheet, downloaded the financial records, forwarded the LLC's transaction history to a secure personal email account, and printed 2 physical copies which he placed in a fireproof document box in his workshop. He labeled the box with a piece of masking tape. He wrote one word on it: documentation. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single text to a woman named Patricia Dunmore, a family attorney in Charlotte, whom his Aunt Rosalind had used 12 years ago during a property dispute. He had not spoken to Patricia in 5 years. The text said only, "Patricia, it's Marcus Whitfield, Rosalind's nephew. I need an hour when you have one." She responded in 4 minutes, "Tomorrow at 9. Patricia Dunmore's office was on the 14th floor of a building on South Tryon, and she was the kind of woman who had heard every version of every story and kept none of it on her face while you told it. She had close-cropped natural hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a yellow Lego pad she filled in complete sentences rather than shorthand. She reviewed the documents Marcus brought, printed, organized, date-stamped, for 11 minutes, without saying anything. Then she said, "She was a signatory on the LLC, but you were the funding source? Every dollar that seeded it came from my project draws. I can show the bank-to-bank transfers. And this consulting arrangement, no contracted scope, no deliverables, just invoices." "Correct." Patricia wrote a line on her legal pad and circled it twice. The LLC structure was designed to look like a business expense. If the funding source is your earned income, and the payouts went to her personal account via this consultant, what we're looking at is the organized transfer of marital assets to a third party. She looked at him over her glasses. "This is not ordinary infidelity, Marcus. This is financial conspiracy." "I know what it is," he said. She told him what she needed. He had most of it already. She gave him a list for the rest. At the door, she paused and said, "You came prepared. That's going to matter." Ed drove from her office to his Aunt Rosalind's house in Belmont, 40 minutes west on I-85. Rosalind was 71 and had a memory like a site survey, precise, spatial, nothing misplaced. She had known Simone, had liked her in the reserved way of a woman who keeps her endorsements measured. When Marcus sat at their kitchen table and told her what he had found, she poured 2 cups of tea and did not speak until he finished. Then she said, "Did you ever wonder why she always wanted her name on things? The house deed, the LLC, that storage unit you rent? I thought it was about security." "She was never insecure," Rosalind said. "She was building leverage." She set down her cup. "She came to me 3 years ago when you were on that long project in Virginia, said she wanted my advice on property succession. She asked me whether the house would transfer to her automatically if something happened to you." She looked at him steadily. "I told her to talk to a lawyer. He didn't tell you because I thought she was just being cautious." She paused. "I'm telling you now." Marcus drove home in the dark. He stopped at a hardware store and bought a new deadbolt for the workshop door. He installed it in 20 minutes, without the lights on, the same way he had learned to work in low-visibility conditions, slow, by feel, trusting what he had already measured. 2 days later, Patricia called to tell him that her paralego had found a previous civil judgment in Forsyth County. 3 years before Marcus met Simone, she had been named in a financial dispute involving a former boyfriend. A contractor in Winston-Salem who had sued her for $38,000 in improperly transferred funds from a shared business account. The case had settled out of court for $21,500. There was a non-disclosure as part of the settlement, but the judgment itself was public record. It was not the first time. That evening, Marcus made dinner. He cooked the way he always cooked, methodically, from scratch, without shortcuts. Simone came home at 7, slightly later than usual, and set her bag on the counter in the careful way of a person managing a performance. She asked about his day. It told her about a flow rate calibration he had worked on. She listened and nodded and cut a piece of chicken without meeting his eyes for more than a second at a time. He watched her and said nothing and thought about his grandfather's bridge. The foundation is the whole argument. Simone left 11 days later. He came home and she was gone. Not surprised, not chaotic, but cleanly extracted the way someone exits when they have been preparing the exit for a long time. The note on the counter said she needed space. She would be in touch. He read it once, set it flat on the counter, and went to his workshop. He sat at his desk, the cedar one he had built board by board, and he noticed what he had never thought to check before: the hollow leg on the left rear corner where the joinery met the base. He had designed it with an interior channel for cable management. He had told her that when he built it, the envelope was inside it, wedged flat against the inner wall. Sealed, dated 5 years ago, which was 8 months before she ever moved into the house. He opened it with a letter opener. Inside were 2 folded pages in her handwriting, neat, unhurried, written in the blue ink she used for everything important. It was not addressed to anyone. It was a set of instructions, a timeline, a sequence of steps laid out the way an engineer might lay out a project schedule. Step 1 was establishing trust. Step 2 was positioning her name on shared assets. Step 3 was the LLC. Step 4 was the exit. She had estimated the timeline at 4 to 5 years. She had underlined one sentence near the bottom of the second page. The key is to move before he realizes there is movement. He read it twice. He photographed every page. He placed it in the document box. Then he called Patricia. She left. He said, "When?" "Today." "Good," Patricia said, and there was something measured and certain in her voice. "Then we file tomorrow." The meeting happened on a Tuesday 3 weeks later in the conference room of Patricia Dunmore's office on the 14th floor. Simone arrived expecting a preliminary divorce mediation. She came with Travis Ellison and a lawyer named Harper who worked primarily in asset protection. She walked in composed and sat down across the table from Marcus and did not look surprised to see Patricia. She did look surprised to see his aunt Rosalind, who sat at the far end of the table in a gray blazer, hands folded, face still as a level surface. She looked more surprised when Patricia set the first binder on the table. Patricia did not preamble. She walked through it in the order Marcus had built it: the LLC formation, the seating transfers, the 11 months of consulting invoices, the total of $214,000, the complete absence of any documented deliverable. She set a printed copy of the Forsyth County civil judgment on top of the binder, without comment. She placed the photographs of the 5-year-old letter next to it, enlarged to full page and readable from across the table. Simone's attorney, Harper, said, "We'd like a moment to consult." Patricia said, "You'll have time for that. There are 2 more items." The second item was a counterfiling Marcus had already submitted with the county, a claim for recovery of improperly transferred marital assets under North Carolina statute, with full documentation attached. The third was a letter from the North Carolina State Bar's Professional Licensing Division, noting that a complaint had been submitted regarding a licensed CPA who had advised on the LLC's formation. The CPA's name was on Simone's original tax document. It was also Travis Ellison's cousin. Travis Ellison, who had said nothing until this moment, looked at the letter for a long time, and then looked at his own attorney, who was not in the room because Simone had not thought to bring one for him. Simone looked at Marcus across the table. It was the first time she had looked directly at him since she walked in. Her expression had moved through its stages. The confident entry, the slight recalibration, the controlled assessment, and had arrived somewhere harder to name. Not fear exactly. The specific vertigo of a person who has just understood that the ground they thought was stable was never what they measured it to be. She sighed. Marcus, we can talk about this. There are things you don't understand about. He understands everything, Rosalind said from the end of the table. Her voice was quiet and absolute. He's an engineer. He measured it twice. Simone looked at her. Then she looked back at Marcus. He did not return her look with anger or satisfaction, or any expression that could be described as an emotion. It was simply present the way a finished structure is present. Complete, weight-bearing, done. He collected the documents Patricia pushed toward him, closed his folder, and stood. The filing speaks for itself, he said. Your attorneys know how to reach Patricia. He walked out. He did not look back. Rosalind fell into step beside him in the hallway, and they rode the elevator down in silence, and he held the door for her at the lobby, and they walked out into the November afternoon, and neither of them sighed anything until they reached the parking deck. Then Rosalind said, Your grandfather would have been proud. Marcus nodded once. I know. 14 months passed like water moving through a system that had been correctly engineered. Steady, unobstructed, doing exactly what it was built to do. The civil recovery filing resolved in Marcus's favor that spring. The full $240,000 was subject to restitution order, a portion of which came from the forced liquidation of assets Simone had titled in her own name during the final year of the marriage. Travis Ellison's consulting firm was dissolved following the bar complaint, which resulted in a 2-year suspension for the CPA involved. Ellison himself relocated to Columbia, South Carolina, where he worked, by all accounts, Marcus received secondhand, in a property management office. Simone's law school friend, a woman named Dana, who had always watched Marcus with a particular alertness, called him 6 months after the resolution to tell him that Simone had moved him to a 1-bedroom apartment in Gastonia and was working in accounts receivable for a mid-sized logistics company. Dana did not say this with satisfaction. She said it the way people relay information they feel someone is owed. Marcus thanked her. He didn't ask anything further. He heard, through Derek the electrician, that Simone had called her mother's house once to talk, and that her mother had not answered. He registered this without ceremony and moved on. The house in West End, which Marcus had renovated plank by plank, and which had been subject to competing claims in the initial filing, was confirmed as his sole property 3 months after the ruling. He repainted the main bedroom a color his Aunt Rosalind called Riverstone, a gray with the faintest blue undertone. He resandanded the walnut table and resealed it, and the surface came up cleaner than the original finish. He was seeing a woman named Shade, a structural consultant he had worked adjacent to on a drainage project in Concord. She had asked good questions during the project meetings. Specific, technical, unimpressed by credentials, and interested only in whether the math was right. She came to dinner at his house on a Thursday in August, and they ate on the back porch he had built, and talked for 3 hours about nothing urgent and something that felt, in the way only unhurried things can feel, entirely solid. He did not rush it. He measured it twice. On a Saturday morning in late October, Marcus rose before 5, ground the coffee, and sat at the walnut table in the early light. Through the back window, he could see the Japanese maple he had planted in the corner of the yard the previous spring. It had taken, which he had not been certain it would, and its leaves were just beginning to turn deep red at the edges, burning quiet in the gray morning air. He thought of his grandfather. He thought of the bridges Ilmor had built across rivers in Georgia that still carried weight after 60 years, because the man had known that preparation was the whole argument. He thought about the cedar desk in his workshop, its hollow leg, the letter he had burned in a metal bin in the backyard the day after the resolution was filed. Some things you keep for evidence. Some things you burn because you are finished with them. He refilled his coffee and watched the maple, and did not think about Simone at all, which was its own kind of completion, not absence, release. The difference between an open wound and a scar. One required constant attention. The other was simply part of the structure now, load-bearing, Integrated, proof that the thing had been built to last. It was clear. He was solvent. He was home. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out two more for you that I think you'll really like.